in this episode of the Critical Oxygen podcast.
If they're the endurance athlete that doesn't pick up a weight, you can see that being problematic. If they are the power lifter that their heart rate hasn't gotten north of 100 beats per minute since the Clinton administration, they're gonna have problems as well. So you can kind of see where that blended, that hybrid athlete is where people need to start heading to be more efficient.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Critical Oxygen podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your athletic potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson, and today we're joined by Lee Throckmorton. Lee is recently retired from a 30-year career in public safety, which began on the ocean front as a lifeguard for a large volume tourist destination in Southeast Virginia. He then transitioned to working in the fire service, where he served as a paramedic, hazardous material technician, code enforcement, and arson investigator. His assignment to the fire marshal's office took Lee to the police academy and field training program within the city's police department. Now in retirement, Lee is the founder and CEO of Kaizen Groundworks, which specializes in tactical athlete preparation for individuals looking to enter into the tactical workspace within public safety. Lee, welcome to the show.
Phil, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Lee reached out to me, and he has a unique story to tell. His background and all of that. I'm really excited, and I really hope all of you who are kind of interested in the tactical realm and stuff, and just athletic development in general, this is going to be a really fun podcast. So, Lee, if you wouldn't mind just starting, I gave the 3,000 foot version of your background, but what kind of got you into training people in the public service, and what got you into the public service sort of thing in the beginning, just to start with?
Well, like you said in the introduction, I started on the ocean front in Southeast Virginia and Virginia Beach specifically, working as a lifeguard. And it didn't take me long. I was a teenager and I didn't have any education or context. But at the time, I recognized, one, that I enjoyed being in that environment, the emergency environment, high demand environment, to where there are some consequences that are a little more than day to day for people, and I felt comfortable and competent in that environment. And secondly, again, without context and education, I recognized that the individual their level of physical ability could dictate the outcome, positive or negative, in the tactical space. So, and that translates to most public safety, police, fire, wildland, SWAT. It goes everywhere, but it's almost even more binary on the ocean front when you have an individual that's they're either drowning or they're not drowning. Can the lifeguard get to them or not get to them? And we had time to sit up in the lifeguard stand and think about a lot of things on a slower day. And
right.
It really was intriguing to me that an individual's lack of stamina, or exceedingly high stamina, or lack of speed, or extremely fast, could change that outcome, and that interested me. So I didn't really have much of a path. I wasn't somebody that grew up from 3 years old and decided I wanted to be in a police officer, a firefighter, doctor, lawyer. So, but as I started to get more and more immersed in that environment, it started to intrigue me more. And the only way to stay a lifeguard for longer than through maybe college was to either be a school teacher or get into the fire service. So I didn't really have any interest in being a school teacher, but the fire service did intrigue me as well, because like I said, I enjoyed that environment. So I was lucky enough to get picked up by a high tempo fire department about 30 minutes away from my hometown, where we had a wide array of occupancies. Pretty much most of the things that you're going to see in a fire department, we were around and we had some experience in, and it was a extremely busy department at times. We had upwards of 50,000 calls a year. So, wow. It wasn't a slow rural department. It was an urban department. So we definitely got our call volume up high. And as I kind of worked through that and started to get involved in more aspects of public safety, I was seeing more demands, physical and mental demands for the provider, and that again continued to intrigue me. And I was working both of those jobs at the same time. I worked the lifeguard service for about 22 years. I worked the fire department for about 26, and I worked those in concert. So I kind of got to see a diverse a diverse level of physical needs on two different jobs, two different times a year. So that was interesting to me as well. Also, while I was in there, like you said in my introduction, I had the ability to go to the fire marshal's office, which involves going to the police academy and getting through the city's police field training program. Pretty much all the training that you would need before you get into a patrol car on your own and move through the city. And that
so is a fire marshal essentially akin to a police officer, just investigating more of like that arson background and stuff like that?
Correct. We would do bombs, environmental crimes, arson, code enforcement. That was going to be our main area, and it was just easier to train a firefighter to go to the police academy than the other way around, it seems. So that's kind of how they handle that. So again, layered on top of having the lifeguard experience, I was getting to get some law enforcement experience. I had the fire experience, and all of those they were like 3 different sports, and it was interesting to be a part of the seeing what the demands were for each one of those things. Now, the lifeguard service, obviously, in Virginia, we have a decent winter. It's not too bad, but we're not going to be out there in shorts and a tank top in February. There's nobody in the water. So in the wintertime, it was one job, and that allowed me to kind of get more into the strength and conditioning world. I had gotten a few certifications, NSCA, got into the CrossFit space a little bit, and was able to work in a few gyms in the area. I owned my own gym for a little bit, which kind of gave me some practical experience with strength and conditioning with others. So I've kind of seen this space through a handful of different ways, and I've enjoyed being a part of it. So in retirement, it seemed like an easy fit for me to want to stay involved in the tactical community and help them with their strength conditioning as I can.
Yeah. And we'll put retirement in quotes, right? Because I'm sure you're still working quite hard and quite a lot. But do you now own your own gym again, or are you doing more like consulting for certain groups?
My wife has a very successful gym that she takes care of. In fact, when I had I kept all my equipment from when I had my gym. And being a gym owner wasn't my path, but I was bought out of my lease and made a little money and was able to keep all my equipment. I didn't have to sell everything. And my wife took it over, and she's way more successful than I've ever been in that space. She's a much better gym owner than I am. Very successful. So I use her space if I'm coaching somebody live. If I have groups of people that I'm doing live in the tactical space, which I do currently. But a lot of it is remote and consulting and one-on-one remote coaching. That's where the business is growing bigger than anywhere else.
Yeah, I've had individuals who want to pass the military fitness exams or police academy fitness exams, those sort of things, or even firefighters reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, I need this is what I'm doing to train. What do you think about it?" So I consult, from that perspective. And where I always start is I always say, okay, well, what are the demands of the sport, right? Because whether you're, in the lifeguard community, firefighter community, police community, it can be a matter of life and death, which makes it especially the thing that blows my mind about firefighting is it's very individual but you're working as a team, right? You have a house that's burning down or something like that. You go in as a team, and you don't want to have to be carrying somebody out because they're not fit enough, right?
Right.
Because then that's just one more thing you're worrying about. So you want everybody to be, functioning as a well-oiled machine in that perspective, or from that perspective, which makes it a little bit like a team sport with then individual requirements. And that's what really intrigues me. I was a rower my freshman year at the University of Michigan, and that's kind of like a little bit of a merging of individual endurance plus the team aspect of things. Because if you have a boat of 8 guys and one person just doesn't have the rhythm of everybody else, then they're going to throw the whole boat off, right? So maybe that's I hope that's like a kind of a good connection in connection point. I don't want to make it seem like rowing is firefighting, but that's from my perspective, I'm like, I wonder if that's kind of similar in a sense.
The stakes are higher, and that's really the only difference.
Yeah,
that really is the only difference. The stakes are higher, and you are depending on the folks that are on your engine company or in your battalion. You're depending on them to have the physical ability to get the job done. And it is optimal to have everybody with that mindset and everybody going into it, because you can get some people hurt if you're not where you need to be. So it's definitely it was a high priority for me, and it should be a high priority for most people that are in the public safety space, for sure.
So let's kind of dive into maybe the historical context of how tactical athletes have trained in the past. We had a conversation offline, and I can't remember it because it was a little while ago, but you were telling me, oh, they used to train like this, and then it kind of shifted. So if you wouldn't mind kind of orienting people, like, how did, firefighters, other, public service people used to train, and then how has that kind of shifted, and now where are we at in terms of how these individuals are training to get prepared for their jobs?
I'm going to give you my experience.
Sure.
My generation. I can't necessarily speak to generations prior to me. I'm 50, so that kind of gives you some context of where what my range was. But in my opinion, and I'm sure there's be some people to push back on this, I think that there is a line in there's a mark in the timeline that things changed a little bit, and I'm going to say that line is going to be early 2000s. So,
okay.
It's my understanding and certainly my experience that prior to the internet and prior to the functional fitness, the functional fitness space, becoming more popular, and those methodologies becoming more popular, that seems to be where people kind of got a little things kind of changed. There was a little bit of a paradigm change. Prior to that, the early 2000s, there was, I'd say, the specialists, they would either be bodybuilding, powerlifting, or the endurance sports, right? Those were the main 3 things. And I fell in that category too. It was either running and doing bis and tris. And a lot of that had to do that we correlated aesthetics with performance, right? Unless you were a 7-foot basketball player, the aesthetics was going to be the most important thing. Once the internet kind of came around, the functional fitness, the CrossFit, and I realized that's a polarizing methodology nowadays. But once that came around and started to kind of expose people to higher intensities, some blended intensities, moving the power lifters and the bodybuilders were starting to move some weight at a higher heart rate. And folks were starting to recognize in the tactical space, they were recognizing it felt closer to what they did day to day, on the high end of whether it be apprehending a suspect, whether it be stretching a hose line in the second floor of a residence. Those intensities were being touched on more after those sort of methodologies were sprinkled in. And I think that's where things have kind of changed, to where it's gotten away from specialization and the community is recognizing a more generalized approach, especially with tactical athletes, is more important, and I think it's going to be more beneficial. Now, I have personal opinions about what should be biased a little more. I personally feel that we're on the Critical Oxygen podcast, so I'm in a good spot to say that I think that endurance, is probably going to be a higher priority for a tactical athlete. If we have to do something, I think a strong endurance athlete is going to be what we're looking for. And so, and that's kind of where I think things are starting to move. And people that are experiencing more, they're getting away from being afraid of the concurrent training and getting, being afraid of, I'm going to lose all my strength if I do endurance work at the same time, that sort of stuff. So, and so I think people are starting to see that being specialized doesn't transfer, and you definitely got to be more generalized. And I think that's where I'm glad to see things going, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, and that's like I did CrossFit for the last 4 years during my PhD, and I loved it. But one of the things that I kind of came away with is like I call CrossFit an endurance sport with a very high strength requirement. So the prerequisites to be good at CrossFit is you have to have really high endurance, but you also have to have, the ability to deadlift, 400 pounds, right, or, like other things like that. And that's probably why more and more people have started to adopt, or more and more tactical athletes have started to adopt CrossFit, because it's kind of a similar thing. You're not, if you're in a full suit of firefighting gear, how much does that weigh?
I'm going to just throw a number, and I'm going to say 50 pounds, and that's probably that's tank, helmet, gear.
Yep.
I'm not talking hose and tools. That's going to add something, but right, I'm going to say 50 pounds, and that depends on municipality. That depends on a type of gear and what you're wearing, but that's a good roundabout number, I think.
Yeah, but even if we just think about that, right, then having higher muscle mass and higher force output to begin with, like just being strong, that makes that extra 50 pounds feel, well, maybe not feel lighter, but affect your physiology less. So if you're strong to begin with, the gear you're wearing is going to affect you less. And then if you're on top of that, if you have good endurance, then, that's what you need to do. Because if you go to, say, a fire to fight it, you might be there, 30 minutes to 4, 5, 6 hours potentially, right? Like doing all these movements in that super heavy gear, and then you're trying to pull the hose out, and then you're holding the hose, and it's like, like I remember, them, like firefighters coming to like, elementary school and like giving us demonstrations, and they were like holding on for dear life, right? Because that water is coming out so forcefully. Right. And it's like, so you have to be super strong, but then you also have to be able to project that strength over the course of a long time in adverse environments as well, right? Like wearing that suit, you're going to get really dang hot. And then going into the fire, right, it's gonna make it even worse, right? So it's impressive.
And you bring up another point that's different, from the rowing. You as a rower, you knew the distance, you knew the weather, you knew what your environment was going to be. You knew that you knew the distance, you knew your team, you knew how long the race, all that stuff. And in the tactical space, there's no, I would love to have a printout every day when we would show up for work and say, okay, at 1 o'clock we have an occupied dwelling that's going to be lit off, or or if you're on a SWAT team, hey, we're gonna have an active shooter at 2 p.m. But that doesn't, obviously that doesn't work that way. So you don't know exactly. So that's why the more generalist approach is going to be beneficial. You brought up a whole bunch of different parts to the puzzle. I like to look at a tactical athlete. You see, I haven't played a video game in 20 years, but I do remember, playing Madden football as a young person, and
Mm-hmm.
each of the players had, they had speed 75 out of 100. You had the score, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And same thing as a tactical athlete now. Depending on who you are and your training, you're going to have a score, whether in stamina, speed, power, strength, flexibility, cardiorespiratory endurance, and all that stuff. And specifically within the fire service, those layers are pulled away before you even start to work. I mean, as you alluded to, your environment to start. You're in an environment that if you were to try to breathe in that environment, your airway would swell up and you would die. I mean, one breath is enough to injure you permanently or be fatal. The temperatures are high, like you said. The visibility is low. It's loud. It's stressful. So you can see that those bars are shrinking on your attributes, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, you have your gear, like you alluded to. So you have gear that does not allow you to thermoregulate appropriately. You can't evaporate, and your body's going to do what your body's going to do. It's going to take that blood and it's going to send it to the skin to try to evaporate. It's going to send a lot of that cardiac output is going to go to try to thermoregulate, and it's not going to happen because you're wearing vapor barrier gear, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
you're going to sweat, but it's not going to evaporate as well. The tank itself, you brought that up. You're breathing positive pressure because we can't. The mask has to have some pressure, so the particulates and the carcinogens, the CO2, all that stuff doesn't get into the mask, so it's got to have that. So you're working hard to breathe there. Gloves you're wearing, 30% off your grip. Your VO2 max from just the environment and the tank itself, you're shaving 20% off. So all these things before you even set foot into the building is going to be you're just peeling away at that. And if your bar is already, you're starting at 40% out of 100, you don't have a whole lot, you don't have a whole lot of room. So raising that ceiling as high as possible. And again, the reason I really harp on the fact that I think that this is an endurance sport, if we want to call the public safety a sport, is it's all about where that cardiac output is going to go. And you have, as you know way more than I do, that cardiac output is finite. And as you start taking that oxygenated blood away from the skeletal muscle, and it's competing with the respiratory system and all that stuff, and that's what you're getting into. So it's incumbent upon the people in tactical space to have as much of that, as much as they can get before they even get in there, or they're gonna find themselves in a jam.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and the way you described it was perfect because there's so many things. Like, as an exercise physiologist, we use exercise as our like stress of choice, right? Because exercise is crazy. And then, but you just put it in a way that's like, okay, well, like, going into a fire, right, with all of those other requirements, you are reducing every predictor of performance by a big chunk, a big percentage, right? 30%, 20%. I had somebody reach out to me a little while ago, and they were, doing probably some tactical work, but they were doing VO2 maxes with and without like a weight vest on, and they could not figure out why all of their VO2 maxes were suddenly so low. But it was because they were taking into account a relative VO2 max that had, an extra 40 pounds accounted for.
Right.
So I was like, well, did you correct for the fact that these people were wearing a 40-pound, vest as well? And they were like, oh shoot, no. So then they, corrected, and sure enough, everything was similar for them. But yeah, when you go into, like a fire and you're wearing that extra 50 pounds, it's like VO2 max is already reduced. And in like the endurance world, right, which is where I dwell a little bit more, the biggest challenge that you're going to have is either heat altitude or a combination of the two really are going to be your biggest, either reducers of partial pressure of oxygen or, increased cardiac output that's going to go to skin blood flow, which then means you can't get oxygenation to the working muscle. So it's like you're never in a state where, like, at the start of a 1,500 meter run, somebody puts, a 20-pound, 30-pound vest on all these guys, and it's just like, all right, now go ahead and do it, because it would be rather funny, I think, watching 1,500 meter Olympians or high college athletes try to actually, effectively work at those higher weights. But one of the questions I wanted to get to is, there's like tests and, entry exams and other things like that. Have the tests to become part of certain positions kind of shifted over time, or is it same relative tests? People are just looking for better performance in those tests.
I think the tests have stayed, and I can't speak to the law enforcement side of the house as much as far as testing goes to get in. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with generalized police testing. SWAT testing kind of depends on the municipality, and even in the fire service, it depends on the municipality. Some places even they might not do anything. They'll be like, okay, well, we'll train you once you get to the fire academy, and that adds a whole nother layer to the issue. But the fire department has something called a CPAT, and that, be honest with you, looks, we're talking about CrossFit, looks a lot like a CrossFit workout. Okay. And it's a mixed modal eight station event with no rest in between. You're doing job like tasks, but a lot of the municipalities they can't have anything that you need to learn. Like, it can't be you can't have to learn how to put an SCBA tank together to test you to get in. I mean, it has to just be something that's just testing a physical ability. It's not necessarily, working on a job task that takes some education. So there is some limitations to what you can do. I think the CPAT for the fire departments is pretty good. When you're testing hundreds or 1,000 people for a job, it's got to be something that's easy to implement. And this is a sub 10 minute evolution. So you can get a lot of people in and out of it. But I think that, again, if you have the bodybuilder that shows up, and this is kind of what I see a lot that happens. You got and listen, don't get me wrong. These are not judgments against any particular activity. I think a bodybuilder might still be in the top 5% of our society's physical fitness at this point. But when they show up and they have to get on the first evolution, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but the first evolution.
No, not at all. Actually, if you wouldn't mind just walking through it, that would be perfect.
Okay, you can put me on the spot. You don't
have to get it perfect. We can edit it.
Here's what I will say is that the two areas that I think gig most people are they put a 50-pound vest on you. I mean, for the whole evolution, right? So you've got the individual that has never trained above body weight for anything, right? You're already in trouble, okay? You put a 50-pound vest on. On top of that, they put, just for the first portion, they put another 25 pounds of sandbags on top of that, and then they put you on a stair mill for 3 minutes, and you're walking up steps. Now, people can, walking up steps with groceries sometimes will, depending on, your geography, that can kind of knock you out of breath. You can imagine somebody that has done nothing but, specialized in one area of fitness gets in there and they load them up above body weight and they start getting on that stair mill. Their mind is blown and they're in trouble. And that heart rate gets north of 90%. quickly because they have that aerobic deficiency syndrome, and they're in big trouble. The other area within the CPAT that people do find themselves getting to a jam at towards the tail end of it, there's a 160, 170 pound dummy that they're going to drag, and they're going to drag at I believe 70 feet, and that's usually, people are already, pretty taxed. So you can imagine at the end of a mixed modal workout at your gym, and the last thing you have to do is, hey, you're going to have to drag this 165-pound dummy 70 feet.
Drag your buddy.
Right. Yeah. Drag your buddy. And they just, if they're the endurance athlete that doesn't pick up a weight, you can see that being problematic. If they are the power lifter that their heart rate hasn't got north of 100 beats per minute since the Clinton administration, they're gonna have problems as well. So you can kind of see where that blended, that hybrid athlete is where people need to start heading to be more efficient. And it's not just in the fire service. I'm currently training a handful of law enforcement officers that are looking to get into SWAT school coming up very soon. And I was doing some research, and there was a study done. I believe it was in New Zealand. They put they kitted out a handful of SWAT officers and had them do an active shooter evolution in a multi-story building, and all they did was put a polar heart rate monitor on them, and that was eye-opening enough for them to see where relative they were using 220 minus the age for heart rate. I know that's a debatable metric, but they were still showing that these evolutions were extremely high heart rate for individuals, and you could see the individuals that maybe had some, how quickly they got to those higher zones. I think they were using a five zone system, and see how quickly they got to that fifth zone in the 20-minute evolution, how long it took. And a lot of people that are just focused on lifting weights and being strong, when they put themselves in that position, it's a problem. So I don't see people getting in trouble in the tactical space with that absolute strength. I see them getting in trouble with lack of aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, and that muscular endurance. And I think that's where I think people, that's when their mind starts to go, okay, this isn't what I want to be doing right now. We don't have a whole lot of situations. And you talked about, you had some experience with CrossFitters. Well, they're going to have to do that one rep deadlift in the higher levels, and they're going to have to clean and jerk heavy, and they're going to have to do all that. But in the tactical space, it's not. The strength has its place, but it seems to be that those other capacities are going to be where things get really, really hairy for folks.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like a lot of the job, if not 99.9% of the job, isn't going to be, lifting something super, super heavy once. It's going to be lifting something moderately heavy, which, if we say moderately loosely, right, like you still have to be really dang strong a lot of times. Or lifting, like, for example, again, like if you had somebody who is purely endurance based, and, all they did was run or cycle or something like that, and then they were, like 145 pounds, 150 pounds, and they put on that 70 pounds at the beginning of the CPET test that you were talking about, like that's 50% of their body weight that they're now, wearing. And if they've never done strength training, then, they're not going to have good strength to weight ratio, so they're not going to be able to make up for that. Even though their cardiovascular system could be super strong, just doing, I always like to do the math, like, if I lost, like say 5 pounds, where would my VO2 max go? But then if you go the opposite way, where it's like, well, if I gained 70 pounds, where would my VO2 max on a relative scale go, right? It could go from 70 to like 35 or, something like that, depending on, well, I guess it would probably go about halfway. So it'd still be in the 50s, but it's still, that's a significant loss of your body's ability to have some level of, cardiovascular fitness in a sense.
And there's a gentleman to even more kind of define the between sport and the tactical space. There's a gentleman named John Bennett out of Florida whose research that I kind of pay close attention to, and he articulated that the work in the tactical space is performed out of necessity and not maximal performance like a sporting event. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how fast can I get down the field and put myself in a position to catch a football. It is what the situation, a dynamic situation, what it presents you, and that necessity is where your needs are going to be valued at that time. So that's certainly another thing to keep in mind.
Right. And it's also what's the least amount of work you can do in order to get this task completed. So, having movement efficiency and other things like that then becomes important because, if you're working close to your 1 rep max, that's going to be much less efficient than if you're working at, 25% of that,
right,
for example.
Right.
So again, kind of like the argument for both like the strong endurance base and strength base as well. Again, it's like, CrossFit must have been designed for these tactical athletes. And I think in the beginning, I don't think it was designed for tactical athletes, but there was a lot of fire departments, police departments, other things like that were early adopters of CrossFit for that exact reason.
Right.
So let's kind of shift a little bit. So, you work individually with athletes and other things like that. When an athlete comes in to you, are there assessments that you do? How are you evaluating these athletes in order to know if they're going to be able to do whatever, if it's the police officers who want to go into SWAT, the firefighters who want to, do a little bit more of like the, kind of maybe like wildland firefighters. I'm sure those are pretty demanding jobs and whatnot. So how are you assessing your athletes and evaluating them when they first come in?
It's very low tech, and I'm able certainly compared to what you do, extremely low tech. And I don't have any experience coaching D1 athletes, but my assumption is when a blue chip prospect comes into Alabama or Michigan or Washington, the percentages that they're going to uptick on the physicality scale are probably small. I could be talking out of school, but when people come to me, a lot of times they want to get into the public safety space. So either they haven't done anything or they've done what they thought. They worked at the limits of their understanding, and I rode my bike some, I did some yoga, I did, their impressions of fitness were whatever they've, been presented. Or I'll get an individual that is either so far on this side, on the strength side, or they're so far on this side of the conditioning. It's not difficult. I don't need the intricate, scientific measurements for this clientele. I think, and I'm painting with a broad brush here on both sides of that. But as you get into the elite athletes, that those percentages of change are going to be smaller. Most of the folks that come to me, they've got room to grow in either multiple areas, or we've just, the pendulum has swung for them in one way. And I'll give you an example with some of the SWAT guys that I have experienced. They came in, and I'll judge a book by its cover. As soon as they walk in, it's just human nature. I'll look and be like, okay, this guy's strong, or this guy's not going to be able to do, or you're going to make assumptions. And I had a group, probably 50% of the guys that came in, I said, okay, well, let's do some deadlift. We'll just do some basic strength stuff to kind of see where they are. And they're pulling 2.5 times their body weight off the ground on minute 1 that we're in there. Right. Not minute 1. I don't want this strength and conditioning.
No warm up or anything like that.
After a proper warm up and discussion of what we're doing, but I knew in my heart of hearts that those guys weren't going to completely stop lifting weights if I said, hey, and I told them, I said, I have them for 4 hours a week. if they stopped lifting a weight that day, they were still going to be twice as strong as they needed to be for the SWAT school when it came up.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, these guys are strong. I put them on an Echo bike or a assault bike or whatever your brand is, and I have them hooked up to a heart monitor. All of my athletes have heart monitor. This is the one metric that I do kind of pay attention to, and they are within in no time at 90% of what their theoretical max heart rate is. I mean, instantly they're sucking wind, and they're like, oh man, or you send them on a run and they can't do it. So I'm like, okay, we're going to spend all of our time on the conditioning aspect of it. Now there are other people that come in, and they may come from an endurance background. They run, and they just might not have that level of strength that we're looking for. And again, we've talked about the strength is important. You just got to figure out from what athlete, what level of importance it is for them, and we'll focus on that a little more, to kind of get them where they need to be. But again, we're looking at the edges. We've got you've got the endurance here, you got the strength power over here, and we're trying to kind of get them, more in the middle of that continuum. And that's kind of what I'm looking at. So luckily it's not very difficult in my community, because the folks that are coming to me are not, blue chip, D1 NFL caliber athletes. So it's easy to kind of decipher that. But I would push that question to you, though. I'm curious, if, let's say tomorrow you were employed by a fire department or a police department or any tactical, where do you think that your expertise would benefit a municipality?
Yeah, no. So the first thing I want to say is, like, whenever you as a coach, whenever you have a, beginner athlete or whoever it is come in, it's always good, especially, like if you understand the requirements of whatever sport you're doing, to test all aspects of those, of that sport. Right. And, for example, you have like the guys who are deadlifting 2.5 times body weight. It's like, okay, they're plenty strong for whatever it is, but then they get on the Echo bike and you're like, oh boy, that's super easy, right? Because they're going to have what I call, like, kind of like those newbie gains in terms of aerobic fitness for, I don't know, probably like 4 weeks to 4 months, depending on, how you implement things and other things like that. So that's something I think that's a really, really good way to start, is just evaluate. And then if there's really low hanging fruit, like, if their balance between strength and endurance is crazy different, especially in this sort of sporting world, right, where you're trying to be, both have endurance and requisite strength to do whatever tasks are presented to you, you're bringing them up and getting them even, right? So in terms of my strengths and what I would do and what I think I could bring is more of, I would still do all like the same tests, right? I would determine, like what would be a good test of endurance, what would be a good test of strength, what would be a good test of kind of a combination of both, and have those tests laid out. But then what I would do, and this is what I kind of specialize in, is kind of taking more physiological metrics, because where I think the physiological metrics are really useful is they tell you the story of the why behind the number that you're getting. So if somebody is really, poor in their assault bike workout, like you said, and their heart rate is already 190, well, maybe that's because their VO2 max is too low. Or maybe it's because they're insanely inefficient in their movement pattern. Or maybe it's a combination of a number of different things. But we will never know that just by looking at heart rate and power output, or, their ability to output power. Right. You can certainly get really, really far in terms of just being like, yep, we know that, this is like your average power output for 10, 20 minutes. So that's going to be your second threshold. We're going to work on getting that second threshold higher, or we're going to do high intensity interval training. That will push those values and their performance up. But again, having those physiological variables will tell you how and why they're changing. So then you can say, okay, well, now we've done 100 tests with 100 different firefighters who have all had, aerobic deficiency syndrome, and we've done this style workout. And in 90% of those workouts and those workout routines, they've increased their VO2 max by 10 or 20%. And that's more than every other variable that we're measuring. So then you can say, okay, well, it seems like VO2 max is probably very predictive of this style of performance. So then you can start to look at the literature and start to see, okay, well, maybe we could tweak our work to rest ratio because that's been shown to increase VO2 max faster. So it's more of measuring the physiology to explain the how and why, and then using that to then feed back and optimize the training going forward. Because at the end of the day, right, I think our goal as coaches is to get an athlete to better physiological and performance heights faster and more optimally, right? Like, we don't just want them to just be like, oh yeah, eventually you're going to get better. But the good thing about, again, beginner athletes is like, if somebody's never lifted weights, like this is a perfect example for CrossFit. People come into CrossFit having never lifted a weight before, and they PR their deadlift every single time you do it for the first 6 months of CrossFit, right? And that doesn't really require too much optimization of the process. But again, if you can start to implement, shorter workout periods that get, better outcomes, then, you're saving more time. So then you can go teach your athletes something else, some other technique, some other, training that they can do, right? So I think that's probably where I think I would fit in, to something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I'm looking to do with Groundworks is I want to get the individual before they even get in there. So I want to, and to what your point is you're providing information. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest value to the departments, is because I think a lot of times there's very few departments that have specialized, educated strength conditioning coaches or exercise physiologists that they're working for them. The budget just isn't there for that. Some of them do. Right. The city that I live in does. They have a great team that does work with that. And there are a lot of places do. Bigger departments do, but a lot of places they'll put the firefighter that looks the best in the uniform. You're now in charge of the PT. Mm-hmm. What I'm hoping to do is I'm trying to catch people early, give them as much of this information as I can. Certainly not to the level that you were just speaking to, but as much as I can get their information and kind of get them pointed in the right direction, and hopefully that kind of carries through and mm-hmm. makes them comfortable and capable within the academy setting, whether that be police or fire. They're comfortable, they're competent, and they're useful during their career, and they're healthy beyond their career. Mm-hmm. And I think that information is a big piece of that puzzle, is getting, because people just don't understand. You can a lot of people don't recognize that you're going to lose 20% of your VO2 max off the top the second you put your gear on and start moving into the fire. They just don't have that. So, that might change their, paradigm of how they're going to, okay, well, maybe I need to raise that ceiling a little bit mm-hmm. and, get that ceiling as high as possible, and providing that information. And I think that it goes to show that information being valuable to the municipality, and they may look at the return on investment of having professionals that are strength and conditioning coaches or exercise physiologists to be a part of the municipality to kind of help give that information and help them mm-hmm. kind of get through that stuff. And it might, there might be a significant return on investment for doing that too. So that's my thoughts on it. Education and equipment, I think, is going to be the biggest benefit to public safety. Getting as much of that as you can to them, and if you can get people ahead of time, like I'm trying to cast a wide net catch those people before they even get into before they show up for day one. And hopefully, hopefully that'll benefit. The military has done a pretty good job of this. I think the military has they've gotten more. I live in a military town, so we have a pretty big special operations footprint down here, and they really try to mentor folks and bring them through and build them up before they get into whatever whatever qualification course that they're going to put them in, and I would assume that there would be a better product at the end of that. I think that public safety kind of trails the military a little bit in a lot of ways, and I think hopefully maybe down the road they'll see that there's some value in that.
Yeah, I think with the military too, like they have more unlimited budget. It's not unlimited, but they have the ability to be like, oh, this new tech, we're going to invest in it, and or design their own sort of technology, and then have all their own people kind of in-house perfect that technology or perfect those testing strategies or whatever it is. And I've spoken to another researcher who's on the east side of Oregon, and he has actually worked with firefighter or fire departments, police departments, other things like that. And what he'll do is he'll regularly go around and do like a physiology testing day. So he'll do a physiology testing day, talk to the person who's the head of PT and say, this group of people are, really lacking on like their VO2 max. So it might be helpful for them to do this. This group of people seems like their muscular strength / endurance is limiting them. So it might be helpful for them to do that. And I think coaching for me is all about the individual. And I know you can't do that all the time, especially, if you have, 30, 40, 50 people, but at the same time, that's also a good opportunity to then individualize it to whoever, whatever their strengths and weaknesses are, to try to bring everything up, because you don't want that failure point to be something that actually does occur, because when a physical failure point is probably happening in a tactical environment, that's, exactly what we were talking about. That's where really bad stuff happens.
Well, and we talked about the environment. I mean, if you get to that end range, and I'll tell you this too, we talk about thresholds, and it's a safety issue as well in the tactical community, because if the blanket statement I like to use is, if you can't breathe, you can't think, and you can't talk. And if it takes you no time to hit that secondary lactate threshold, you're not clearly communicating on the radio, what your needs are, or if you're in trouble, or if you're in a foot chase, and then when you catch the individual that you're chasing, if you can't think clearly and you can't take care of the physicality to apprehend the individual, that's a big problem. That's a real big problem. So, those sort of things. So it's a safety issue upon everything else. And, I think that most people have room for us to push those thresholds to the right. Most everybody. I haven't come in contact with anybody, me personally, that I've worked with, that I didn't have room to push those lactate thresholds at aerobic capacity farther down that x-axis a little bit before it starts moving up that y-axis exponentially. And up until the point where you start to lose that strength, that you don't have that modicum of strength to be effective. So that's the big balance. But I think I'd say for a majority of the people that I come in contact with, that's kind of where my mindset goes. And I think that until I'm proven otherwise, that's the tactic that I can use, and until they pull 2.5 times the body weight off the ground on day one, then I'm like, okay, well, now we really got to push those. We got to push those thresholds to the right.
Yeah, and the thing about a lot of that stuff is, there's some papers that came out probably, a few years ago that were talking about, the potential limits of concurrent training and all of this other stuff. And what they did, if I'm remembering correctly, is they were doing they were taking elite level marathon runners or something like that and doing strength training with them. And they were like, oh, well, because they were doing so much endurance stuff, they were blunting a lot of the strength adaptations. But that's not how most of us operate, right? Most of us can get better at a lot of different things with say 3 days a week of training that a specific modality. So it's as long as you're eating enough and prescribing the correct amount of intensity and fluctuations in intensity and volume, you can do this concurrent training and you can continue to grow and get better for a really, really long time. I think the biggest thing is that the biggest challenge I had with CrossFit is the over application of intensity too much. It's every day you go in and it's okay, well, what's the next hardest thing that we're going to do today? And, so for those out there who are pursuing the tactical space, and I talked to another strength and conditioning coach who works with CrossFitters a lot. His name is Sean Seal from Upside Strength. So go ahead and check him out. He's awesome. He is he's talking about, well, maybe it's time for us to focus a little bit more on that lower intensity zone 2 sort of style training to get endurance up, because it's getting your volume up and it's allowing you to recover between those hard days. And then those hard days allow you to then either, build your strength or build a combination of that strength endurance that you're really looking for. So for those of you who are out there who are going to CrossFit, 5 or 6 days a week and never taking an off day and doing other things like that, maybe there is a little bit of room for growth by going kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, limiting the amount of CrossFit workouts of the day that you're doing and, modulating your intensity that way.
Yes. And I'm a firm believer of that. I do appreciate that CrossFit did shine a light on that concurrent training and showed that it's not as detrimental as folks would believe. But I have always felt better doing high intensity activities based on how much low intensity running I've been doing ancillary to that. So for me, I'm man, I feel great, doing something high intensity on the time frames that I've, put in a lot of, low intensity, 130 beat per minute miles. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference to me. Now, again, I'm never going to be an elite power lifter, and running as much as I do. But again, you don't, we're trying to be in the middle. We're trying to be that generalist, and we're not trying to be on the extremes. And that's been a hard sell for me with some of especially getting people to run slower or getting them to understand the difference between. And the biggest thing in the tactical space, I will say this, is that getting athletes to understand the difference between a physiology day and a performance day, and that's huge, because there's. And again, this is context I didn't have for a long time. It's only through education and experience that I've had it. But I have to, when I tell somebody, hey, listen, your upper limit's going to be 150 beats per minute today, and I want you to do whatever it takes if you need to stop and walk, you're going to stop and walk, and that just tears some folks up, and you have to say,
the ego gets bruised there.
And I said, okay, well, for us, Tuesdays and Fridays are high intensity days. And I was like, those are the sexy days. Everybody loves the Tuesdays and Fridays for us because those are the sexy days. So I tell them that Monday and Wednesday, we got to do the unsexy stuff, and it's going to make the Tuesdays and Fridays easier. And we're hitting the point now with the group that they're starting to see that, and they recognize. And I'll have them all, no matter what we're doing, they're on a heart rate monitor, and they have them on their phones, and they're big numbers, and they can see. And when we're on week 9 or 10, and their work capacity is far exceeding what it was 9 weeks ago, and their heart rate is below what it was, 9 weeks ago, they kind of get the big picture that unsexy stuff on Monday and Wednesday is soaking up that pyruvate and lactic acid and all that other nasty stuff that's that's making them feel bad on Tuesdays and Fridays. So
Right, exactly. And I also tell people that like the zone 2 training and lower is to provide the ability to recover and build volume, and then by building that volume and recovering more, you're actually able to push your high intensity days even harder.
Right.
So you're getting a double benefit essentially by building more volume and being able to go harder and adapt from that. And I also always say is like, if you're skeptical about something, try it for 2 weeks, try it for 4 weeks, do something along those lines. And if it doesn't work, or if you don't see any benefits to it, just go back to what you were doing. You're still training through all that time. So you're getting some level of consistency, and you're probably going to push your performance up a little bit just by, sheer consistency. But if you're skeptical about something, it doesn't hurt to try it. Obviously, within different realms of being responsible. Like you don't just go and do 5 VO2 max sessions, in 1 week for 4 weeks, right? That's out of it. But, in terms of lower intensity stuff, which I think people need a little bit more convincing to try to do, it's like the worst that can happen is that you don't improve your performance over the next 2 to 4 weeks, and then you just go back to what you were doing.
Right. Even if it makes you feel better during the high intensity stuff too, you again, we can't, I can't tear my mask off inside of a structure fire because I feel like I can't breathe. If I can at least make myself feel better through those higher intensity efforts, it might save my rump. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. And I have one more kind of, question that I think we can touch on, because I don't want to take too much of your time. This has been super fun to talk about this sort of stuff. But other than the physical training, are there other aspects that you focus on, like psychological, nutrition, stress management, other things like that? Because I imagine, right, the first time you get into a fire, that's probably a bit scary and a bit intimidating, right? Like how do you teach somebody to, focus, breathe, and so their heart rate isn't just going from, 100 when they walk in to 200, right?
Right.
So do you focus on any of that, or is that kind of something you let other people do?
We talk about it. We talk about stress inoculation. We talk about that sort of stuff. I make sure now when I'm staring at police officers that are working the night shift, they've got newborn children, they got court during the day, and it's hard for me to look at them and go, you really ought to make sleep an important part. So I explain to them that I'm not a licensed dietitian, so I can't sit here and give you your macros and all that stuff. But just I will point you in the right direction. Hey, these are two names of people that I think are experts in the field. Go talk to them. I can give you I can point you in the direction of a book, but understand that everything that we do in here is going to be for naught if this isn't taken care of. We do talk about sleep in the tactical community, as you can imagine. Sleep is a luxury, and I'm a year or a little more of a year than in retirement, and the changes in me mentally and physically from 30 years of not having sleep to having sleep have been immense. I'm getting ready to have my first child, so that's all going to change here.
Congratulations.
The sleep's out the window at this point. So
yeah, you were like,
I might as well go back to the fire
station. I didn't need it for 30 years.
That's right. But we do touch on that, and to be honest with you, I think the best stress inoculator is raising that physical ceiling as high as possible. If I get you in the best shape possible, I think that your mind is going to be able to. You're not worried about how you're feeling. You're not worried about I can't breathe. My muscles are burning. The stress is going to be lower. You're just going to raise that ceiling, and that's kind of where I focus. But I would down the road, I would love to as my business grows, develop a team of subject matter experts that to be able to have people to have resources for that. And I do I do have those individuals that I can point to if need be. But I make sure that everybody knows that stress, sleep, and nutrition are at the base of the pyramid. And if those aren't, you can work out 120 hours a week if you want, and it's not gonna do anything for you if you're not eating, sleeping, and working on that stress. But unfortunately, this community, that's not that again, that's a luxury. That's not a that's not a guarantee. So we certainly do the best we can, but I get them in the right direction as I can.
No, I think like a lot of what you're doing is really good, because you just got to meet people where they're at, right? And if you as the coach can control their ability to suffer and get mentally better through training, right? That's one of the benefits of training and doing hard, grueling activities, is that as long as they don't break you, you're going to be more mentally strong after it. And then when you do get that sensation of, okay, I'm breathing heavy, my legs feel kind of heavy, they're burning, like other things like that, but you can refocus because it's like, oh, I've done this stuff before. This is the same sort of thing in the gym. It's just a little louder, a little bit more chaotic, other things like that. It allows you to then be hopefully make better decisions because you can stay more relaxed and more focused. So no, I like everything you're doing, Lee, and I'll kind of stop us here. And, hopefully people have a lot of questions, because I have talked to people who are firefighters and other things like that. So for those of you who are listening, you can always find me at Critical02. If you liked our conversation, please reach out to me with any questions or anything like that. I'll forward them to Lee. Lee, what's your Instagram handle for people if they want to reach out to you?
It's at Kaizen Groundworks.
Okay, cool. And I'll share that in the show notes as well.
And don't get me wrong. If there's individuals that are beyond the initial phases of the public, and they've gotten into the space. Sometimes you get into the space and relax a little bit, and you kind of get yourself into a position that maybe we're not quite where we need to be. We can certainly a lot of the stuff that we do for tactical athletes trying to get into the public safety space, it certainly has resonates and certainly has value to people that are already in. So we can certainly help out people at all levels of their career. So if anybody has any questions for me, absolutely, I love geeking out on this stuff.
Yeah, and if we get enough questions from the tactical community and stuff, we'll have to get Lee back on to share his expertise and everything like that. Lee, it was so good talking to you. This is kind of a little bit of a change of pace, but still stuff that's very near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate you coming on. Find Lee, ask him questions, go follow him on his Instagram. If you want any coaching or anything like that in the tactical realm, reach out to him as well. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.